Does being pro-life mean that we support every method of conception, including IVF and surrogacy? Today we have with us a very special guest, Jennifer Lahl, to discuss with us the ethical and moral implications of these industries and the fact that we have over 1 million embryos frozen on ice in the United States. All right, guys, as you will hear in this recording of this interview, unfortunately, I had an update to my computer. Remember, I am not exactly tech savvy and I am doing all of this on my own, including editing and all of the tech side of things. So I had an update to my computer that caused my recording platform to use my computer mic as the microphone instead of the one that you are seeing on the camera right now. And that really affected the audio. I did my best to clean it up, but please just bear with us for this episode. This information from Jennifer Lahl is so important. What we're talking about today is a sensitive topic, and we address it with compassion to those that are hurting from infertility, that have been affected by that, that maybe IVF or surrogacy is a part of your story. But as always, we have to speak the truth in love because, as I said on my Instagram, if you follow me on there, I'll say it again here. I believe that any child born of IVF or surrogacy is made in the image of God. They're valuable. They have the right to life. And I'm thankful that they're here. However, I also believe that the over 1 million embryos or children, human beings, that's even what science says. Science says that life starts at conception. Those are human beings that have the right to life. So this is a civil rights issue. I believe that those children are also valuable and worthy to be protected. And so that's why we're having this conversation, to educate and inform people that there are real risks to both of these industries that very often you're not told, including increased cancer risk, increased risk of physical abnormalities in the child, mental health problems across the board, not just for babies and the mothers, but also families in general, which are really the backbone of our society. So it's important for Christians to be consistent and base everything on a biblical worldview, not just how we feel or the sympathy that we might feel towards our friends or family members that have struggled with infertility. I would love for everyone that I know to not struggle with that, to be blessed with a baby. But I also believe that ultimately God opens and closes the womb, and we've really got to address some of these questions where science can only tell us what we can do, but not what we should do. And unfortunately, these industries are leading to a lot of ethical problems that we just didn't really ask before we started this process. So we need to ask these questions. We need to enter into these conversations. I'm sure you're going to love this interview. Jennifer is so knowledgeable. She has been doing this for a very long time now, including her background in pediatric nursing and starting this whole foundation that revolves around ethics in medicine. So I hope you guys enjoy this video. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind you about our affiliate partner, We Heart Nutrition. This company is conservative, they are God-loving people, and they really care about their products. They started this with a mission to create the most bioavailable products. If you did not know, a lot of supplements on the market today, they're really not bioavailable, meaning your body is not able to absorb them because they're not in the correct form. So they went on a mission to correct that and offer these incredible, wholesome products. And so I've been on their vitamins for several months now. I really feel like I can tell a difference. I'm on the women's essential. My husband is on the men's essential, and I'm also taking their wholesome iron and hope to start soon on their hormonal product that they have out now to help support women's hormones, which I'm sure many of us need. So I'm very excited to try out those. But if you want to support them, if you want to support my show, you can check out their products at weheartnutrition.com, and you can use code Caitlin20 for 20% off your order. And as always, you can check out our merch at thereconciledco.com if you want to help support the show. We have some really cool designs over there, planning to continue to put out more and do some hats as soon as we can. We always use the highest quality product, so they are a little bit more expensive, I guess, for a shirt, but they're kind of standard now, the price that we have. if not maybe a little bit under some of the boutique prices. But we always use the highest quality product. It's either Comfort Colors or American Apparel. They are both the garment dyed, heavyweight, very comfortable. I believe both of them are 100% cotton, even t-shirts. So just very high quality, very comfortable, and some really cool designs that are bold and help you start gospel-centered conversations. So with all that being said, let's get into this interview with Jennifer.
All right, welcome to the Reconciled podcast. Today we have a very special guest with us, Jennifer Lahl. She is the founder of the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network and is a filmmaker and a writer and is really leading the charge on this conversation about the ethical and moral issues behind IVF and surrogacy. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Jennifer.
Thank you, Caitlin. It's nice to meet you finally.
Yes. So if you don't mind, just start with a little bit about you, briefly what you do and how did you get into this?
Yeah. Well, let's see. I worked in pediatric critical care nursing for many, many years. And then I went back to graduate school and studied bioethics. Because as a nurse working in largely university teaching hospitals, I was concerned with ethics and where technology, was headed. And the fact that a lot of times we just accept technology without asking the questions, just can do something, should we do it? So when I went to graduate school to get my degree in bioethics, I decided to found a nonprofit because I thought there's so much coming in this space of medical ethics, medical technology, biotechnology that people weren't even thinking about. So I started the Center for Bioethics and Culture, and I president for many, many years. I stepped down recently in the last year and a half or so, just so I could have more free time to do other things that I couldn't do. When you're busy running a whole organization, there's kind of a lot of things you have to do. So now I'm spending a lot more time interviews like this, writing. Just had some research published about a little over a month ago with colleagues of mine. And I sort of kind of carved out my area of expertise in the space of assisted reproduction. It was when I was in graduate school, it was when George Bush was the president, and there was the huge debates around embryonic stem cell research and human cloning research, and everybody was talking about these leftover embryos that had just been abandoned, discarded, whatever. And shouldn't we use them to develop cures? And so at that time, I did a deep dive into assisted reproduction. Then we had 500,000 human embryos. Now in the U.S., we have over 1 million. And I thought, how did that happen? And so that took me into the rabbit hole of looking at assisted reproductive technology, IVF, making embryos, and all. So here we are, 2025-ish.
Yeah. So I know you said that was like the rabbit hole that led you. Were there things, specifically in your line of work as a pediatric nurse that you were seeing, or was it really just this whole debate about embryonic stem cell research?
A little bit of what I was seeing. Certainly in the pediatric ICU, we did take care of IVF babies.
Sure.
That was sort of really, that's been 25 years ago now. So, it wasn't, IVF was not that common like it is now. Like now, oh, you can't have a baby, go see the fertility doctor. Don't even skip a beat. You just go straight from can't get pregnant to the fertility doctor. And so it wasn't that common, but we did sort of see our share of babies that were born prematurely that were, born of assisted reproduction. But it really was the cloning debates and wondering how do we get 500,000 frozen embryos. And I started writing because the debate I live in California. And so in California, we launched a huge debate that wouldn't allow the embryo cloning researchers to buy eggs from healthy women. Because we could see the shift. There weren't going to be enough frozen embryos to sustain this huge research project that America wanted to do to develop cures for people. And I started writing about what happens if the market shifts to healthy girls at college who need to pay their school debt and they just want to sell their eggs for research. So in California, even though we passed and funded through taxpayer dollars embryonic stem cell research and human cloning research, we were able to get then Governor Jerry Brown to sign into law that healthy women couldn't be paid to sell their eggs to make babies. So we sort of launched a big campaign around there and sort of bracketed out using healthy young women to help people. This is all about helping people. And oh, by the way, we're going to pay you to help people. And we were able to, make sure that the law didn't allow people to be paid, young, healthy women, sell their eggs for research. Now in California, they've always been able to sell their eggs to make babies. Because gay couple can buy eggs from a young college student, heterosexual couple, a single man, whatever. But we were able to put a kind of a, bright line around the research, And then what happened was all these young girls in California reached out to me and said, "Oh my God, I sold my eggs when I was a college student. And let me tell you what happened to me." All these really horror stories. And then at that time, I made my first film called Eggsploitation, which featured young, healthy women in the United States who sold their eggs and all the bad things that happened to them, short and long term, all the way up to, they lost their own ability to have their own children. And then it was sort of off and running with filmmaking in this space and books testifying. And, that little film sort of put us on the map, if you will.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess what I want to do today, is for the average person listening to this, like me, that really not very long ago didn't even realize that this was a conversation. I had never heard that, we have over 1 million embryos or children on ice because, science says that life begins at conception. So I know people tend to try to deny that to justify their case, but that's what we believe and that's what science says. Uh, but yeah, I think a lot of people just that aren't really even aware. They just hear the terms IVF and hear the term surrogacy and they think, why shouldn't you support them because you're pro-life? Or there's people just want to have a baby and, there's really no harm being done. So I'm to approach this obviously with sensitivity because I do have personal friends of mine that have had children through IVF, and all of those children, I believe, are made in the image of God. But I also believe that these children that are being discarded or permanently kept on ice are made in the image of God, and that ethically speaking, we're not factoring in what their rights are. And so, I'll love for you to just start with what are the ethical implications of IVF specifically, and then we can get to surrogacy here in a minute. What's the harm being done to women? Is it a safe procedure? Obviously, you've had a lot of women reach out and say, no, it's not. And here's my experience. So if we could just start there.
Yeah, I think first I just want to say I'm absolutely sympathetic to people who want children, through male infertility, female infertility, combination male, female. There's, our fertile bodies are very sensitive, and it's not like I always say we're not like rabbits. It's really amazing that we're able to get pregnant because there's so many, environmental and health factors and things that go into negatively impacting fertility, whether we're overweight or we're too thin or we smoke or, environmental stuff. So, everything I'm going to say today, I don't want people to take away, oh, she just doesn't care about people who want children. It's not the case at all. Again, my desire is as somebody who has a deep interest in ethics to do no harm. And
right.
we have been doing IVF long enough now. We have quite a few studies that show that assisted reproductive technologies, and that's the larger umbrella of which IVF is an assisted reproductive technology. Overall, assisted reproductive technologies are harmful to women's health and harmful to the health of the children born of these technologies. We didn't know all that 10, 15 years ago. So, and because I track the data, I'm sort of a data junkie. IVF consistently has very poor success. Back to why do we have so many frozen human embryos? because the fertility doctor knows that most IVF cycles fail. It's really onerous on the woman's body to take all these fertility drugs so they can get the eggs out of her body, so they can make all these embryos, and hopes that eventually this couple will get a take-home baby and they'll have a live birth. Um, so I think if anything your audience needs to hear today, and we all know people that have struggled with fertility. I won't say we all, most of us know somebody in our sphere of our network, friends, family, that's used IVF, have, had success, that have had healthy children, and that's great. But I'm just saying that the data overwhelmingly says that if you have not had any health implications as a woman taking fertility drugs, or had a child born with problems as a result of assisted technology, quite fortunate, because the data shows that there's a lot of risk. I share the story. I just became a grandmother last year, my first grandson, and
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you. It's been the biggest joy of my life. Uh, so when my daughter was early on in the pregnancies, it became known through just all the scans, ultrasounds that mom that her little boy was going to be born with a serious congenital heart defect. And so they transferred her care to a big university hospital where I actually started my pediatric ICU experience. So I was back where I used to work, but I was back there as a grandma. But when she was seeing cardiologists, in this big university that specializes in babies having open heart surgery, two of the pediatricians at this hospital asked her if he was an IVF baby, because we know now that babies born through IVF have higher rates of congenital heart defect. Now, he is not an IVF baby because there's babies that can be born with congenital heart defects that were conceived naturally. But there's plenty of data now that shows that, babies born of assisted reproductive technology have this reality. So, women are at risk of all kinds of cancers and reproductive problems. IVF babies, overwhelmingly are born premature. They're born birth weight because they're premature. We know that prematurity is a risk for babies. Um, and even if they do survive, they often have to spend weeks, months in the neonatal intensive care unit till they gain enough weight, thrive and eat, go home. So, and not that cost is the primary thing, but we have to be realistic that this is very expensive technology. And we can maybe talk about this new field. Well, it's new in that it's finally being discussed um, in the culture, reproductive medicine. And that's a type of medicine that sort of came out of Catholic doctors who are very pro-life, and the Catholic Church is very strong in their teaching. Not Catholic, but their teaching is you can't do IVF and do a reproduction. It's not accepted if you are a faithful Catholic. You follow the teachings of the Church, because the Catholic Church doesn't allow the unitive part of the sexual act to be separated from the procreative, which means you can't do it in the laboratory, because that separation of love making and baby making. The mystery of the two flesh shall become one. So these doctors who are OBGYN, who see people in their offices all the time, that, we need to get to the root and understand the causes of what's going on with fertility in a husband-wife combination, and address those root causes so that we can help them conceive naturally. And so
That's probably not quite as lucrative as the IVF industry.
not at all. And I have a colleague who practices this kind of medicine, and the university or the hospital where she works is always pressuring her to do IVF because it makes so much money for the university or for the hospital. And yeah, and restorative reproductive medicine is not costly. It's a matter of getting a really good diagnosis. Any of your guests listening today who are struggling with fertility, male or female, or no friends, you just go to the internet and find somebody in your community or in your area that practices restorative reproductive medicine. They will actually look at the underlying causes. And there's quite a few of them all over the United States now and growing. We were talking before we started about, we both know Allie Beth Stuckey. And I had a young woman who reached out to me, I think through Instagram. And her story was she and her husband were having difficulty conceiving. And I said, hey, find a restorative reproductive medical doctor in the community. And within months, she was pregnant naturally. And Allie Beth had her on the show just to tell that story, because I don't think people know that. They really think if we can't have a baby, our only option is adoption or IVF.
Right.
So, I like to cheerlead this other way to help. And, your baby is not going to be born with any kind of problems because of this. It's not high tech. It's not going to make you have to mortgage your house to pay for it.
Right. Yeah. Do you find that these families or these women participating in IVF are low? Any risks of the procedures, or even some of these, if you can share maybe some of the stats that you found following the data on what are the attrition rates for IVF, or, the rates of these children having medical complications or deformities?
So that's the tagline of my film Exploitation is the dirty little secrets. And there's so many little dirty little secrets. We don't this is, the data, the only place in the United States where we have any little bit of data is through the Centers for Disease Control. They don't track that kind of stuff. It's not standardized. So if you run a fertility clinic in the United States, it's not standard that all fertility clinics have to do this kind of informed consent. They have to tell you all these kind of things. They may tell you, they may not. But we also have to realize that a lot of times I'm a couple, interacts with a fertility doctor, they're desperate. They've had too many failed attempts. They've had too many negative pregnancy tests. They've been asked to go to too many baby showers, and so even if, a doctor says, this has a high chance of failure, this has risk to you, this has risk to your unborn child, this has risk, a lot of people will say, I'm willing to take the chance. We see that in other areas. People still smoke, we tell them don't smoke. People still overeat and are overweight, even though we know that that's not good for us. We still do it because, we either can't, control whatever, or we're addicted to cigarettes or whatever, or we're just desperate to have a baby. So it's gotta be both and. But, I would see us as being more prudent to walk back and not just eagerly address infertility through assisted reproductive technology.
Right. So you're saying with the data, it's hard to even say really what the rates are for, cancer and the physical abnormalities of the baby, because it's just not being tracked.
And I think because, like I said, now we have studies on, the children that are born various types of problems. We will get that data when the data starts getting collected and it starts getting published in, as research papers. But this is human experimentation.
Yeah.
We don't know what the long-term effects of freezing an embryo for a year, for 5 years, for 10 years. There's a little girl, I believe, that was just born a couple of years ago now, frozen for 22 years. Will this little girl, as she gets older, we find all kinds of complications, and then we go, there's all these other kids, and what do they have in common? Oh, they were frozen embryos. We don't know. They may be. So it is human experimentation. And obviously these children they're not consenting to being frozen. The parents are consenting to create them and freeze them.
Right. So, so about the data collection, that would be considered abnormal, right? For a lot of other, I would assume for a lot of other areas of medicine, these things are typically required to be tracked, or they track those kinds of things.
Yeah. I've always said, if you donate blood, the minute your blood comes out of your body, it's barcoded, it's in a database. So when your blood eventually gets transfused into somebody else, we know the paper trail of that blood. And then if that person has a reaction, we can see, was it something between these two? Same with organ donation. An organ comes out of your body, it goes into somebody else's body. It's in a big, huge data collection. We don't do that with egg or sperm. There's no, like, if you're a college student and you donate your eggs 10 times and each time they get 20 or 10 eggs, you've got 100 to 200 eggs out there that we don't know when they're eventually are making a baby. We don't know where those eggs come. And, there's been a story recently about a prolific sperm donor who they've just discovered that he has a rare genetic disease. They can't go back and find the children that were born of that sperm because there's no record. Same with embryos. Once embryos are frozen, they can be shipped and sold all over the world. We get sperm from Denmark, we get eggs from France. I mean, it's this huge market, and so it's an area where, for reasons, it's just mind-boggling to me. We don't track everything that literally comes out of a body gets sent to pathology. You've got your gallbladder taken out, they send it to pathology. They look at it. Kidney stone removed. It goes all up down to the lab. This is your kidney stone. But in the space of reproductive medicine, and also, when you look, just using the organ donation model, we didn't start putting organs into humans, human to human transplant, until we've done years of research on animals.
Yeah.
See what happens when you put a pig's heart in another pig, or a kidney from a lamb into another lamb. And that's how we knew that there was rejection, and we have to put people on anti-rejection. So there was all that research in animals before we started doing it in humans. In assisted reproductive technology, we didn't do that research before we said, what happens when we hyperstimulate a woman's ovaries, high dose fertility drugs, in order to get her eggs out of her ovaries? We didn't research that to say, there's problems. It wasn't until we started doing it, especially on the egg donor, not maybe the infertile woman. There's a distinction in the way they're treated separately as medical care. But we didn't look at what happens when you put a healthy woman on high dose fertility drugs in order to get 10, 20, 30 eggs out of her body. What happens short and long term? We just started doing it because we want to help people have babies.
Which is not right to give that many eggs out of a woman. It should just be once every cycle. One.
And occasionally, which is, maybe 3A, which is, we do see natural twins. We do see natural triplets, much more rare. I actually know somebody who naturally had triplets. And she thought, he's asking, did you do IVF? No, we actually naturally had, but it's rare that twins. Right. It's very rare that women ovulate the eggs in one.
Yeah. Yeah. And you touched on this a little bit, but, back to the topic of consent. I hear that from a lot of people. If they're consenting, and especially in the surrogacy industry, which we'll get to more in a minute, what would be your response to someone with that argument that, well, if it's consenting adults and they want to sign up for this and they need the money, or, maybe we understand the risk, why shouldn't that be the basis for allowing what's happening currently in this system? Yeah.
Well, I can respond in a couple of points I would make right away. Is first, I believe that doctors are to do no harm. So even if you want to consent to something, they should be able to say, this is harmful to you. This is harmful, technically could be harmful to your future unborn child. I'm not in the business of doing things harming my patient. And we know that these procedures, these drugs, risk. If you are an egg donor, you're not a patient. So you shouldn't be consenting to do medical things to your body in exchange for money. I mean, money really corrupts informed consent. Even if you tell a woman, that all these risks and all these unknown risks and all these known risks, and you're offering him money, you have corrupted the informed consent. You're not paid to be an organ donor.
Yeah. Is it a substantial amount of money? Sorry to interject here, but how much money are they usually offered for things like that?
It depends on state. Like California is much more, lucrative than say a Midwest state. But just based on the demographics, if you're an Ivy League smart girl, one of the women in the film Exploitation was at Stanford at the time. One was at UCLA in their MD PhD program. So they were paid a lot more than maybe if you go to community college or state school. because it is eugenic. We want good genes. We want like the cream of the crop. Um, but again, back to the infertile couple, and what if the doctor says, you know, if I anecdotally know so many women who either did IVF or their sister or their friend did IVF, later went on and got cancer. So, you know, why are we doing, you know, why are we offering people something that we know has cancer risk to it?
Yeah.
How people don't smoke because of the cancer risk. We tell people to eat healthy because of all the risks of obesity, because we're concerned about their health. But in this one area of helping people, conceive, we sort of throw all the rationality of health and well-being, short and long term, of the woman, of the child, out of the window.
Yeah.
So, I think the consent, it's my body, it's my choice, it's my right. I can sell it. There are things we can't do that only, I can't sell my kidney. It's illegal for me to do that. I can't say it's my body, it's my kidney. I want to sell it to Jim down the street because he's a nice guy and he needs a kidney, and who are you to tell me what I can and can't do with my body?
Yeah.
So, when we want what we want, we sort of ignore, those kind of barriers that are, I think, good, bright lines. Ethics is about drawing lines. This is bad. This is harmful. This is unethical. This is like,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, in your opinion, then, do you think that there is a way to do IVF ethically, or is it across the board something that we should not support?
I think there's no way to do it ethically because these risks don't go away. Like some people will say, well, we won't pay women for their eggs. Well, the medical risks don't go away. It's not the money that,
Right.
I mean, to me, um, egg donors have died as complications of selling their eggs. Surrogate mothers in California, we've had 2 surrogate mothers die in California. There's been other surrogates across the United States that have died. Um, know that infertile women who, Gilda Radner, you're too young to maybe remember who Gilda Radner was. She was a comedian on Saturday Night Live, and she was married to Gene Wilder. Gene Wilder was Willy Wonka in the Willy Wonka movie. And then she and Gene couldn't conceive, and she went through 6 rounds IVF and went on to die of ovarian cancer. Um, you know, you can't, how can you do that ethically? You can't remove, you can't say, well, we'll do it this way because it removes the rest. No, the way you do it, IVF is
Yeah.
drugs. It's the technique that is the rest.
Yeah. The HHS study, I'm sure you probably saw it, about quote unquote gender affirming care recently addressed that topic. How this is this child led movement of whatever they want goes. And in the medical industry, that's, like you said, that's not the ultimate goal of you. It really to look at are we actually doing good by that patient?
Yeah, and actually, now that you mentioned the HHS report, my most recent research is cited in that report, came out of the HHS, because, I've sort of transferred some of my work into the transgender debate. Because of my work in fertility and infertility. I know that when you block a young child's puberty, or you put them on wrong sex hormones, and or you do these genital surgeries, they lost their fertility. So what these children now are being offered it as for their transgender care, and for people not watching, I'm putting that in quotes because it's not fair and there's no such thing as transgender. They're being offered to freeze and bank their egg and sperm as children, as minors. They're being offered, if they haven't gone through puberty, to freeze and bank ovarian and testicular tissue. They're promised that we are preserving your fertility, which is baloney, of course.
Right. Yeah.
And
Okay.
the research sort of showed all that, and
Yeah.
so that's why the HHS people, I think, cited it in the section where it talked about, rendering these children sterile. And then,
Yeah.
I mean, what role does medicine have and playing, you know, destroyer of fertility over here, and then this little switchy changey, oh, but we'll preserve it over here. When we already know that IVF in general has a very, very high failure rate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even asking children to consent so young to something that you can't possibly know what you'll want, 10 to 15 years down the road. And then, like you said, promising girls, and actually it's very unlikely that they would go on to be able to have children, or, potentially not being able to breastfeed a child by choosing the top surgeries and things like that. It's been surreal.
So where you need a surrogate because part of your transgender deciding you're a boy is having your uterus and your ovaries removed along with your breast. But in fact, it's actually the parents that have to consent because children aren't allowed to give. And that certainly as part of the discussion, you could have a conversation with your child about you want to have children after you've, mutilated your body. But, it's, yeah. And again, what's the role of medicine? Is to do harm. Medicine is always oriented to healing. That's why I love the restorative reproductive medical approach. It was oriented to let's find out what's the underlying cause here. How can we heal? How can we restore? Your podcast is reconcile. How can we reconcile your body as it was created? We are created to, reproduce. That's why we're male and we're female. That's why we have egg and sperm and ovaries and breasts and all those parts. Those are part of the design of our body in order to procreate, reproduce, have children. Now, because of the fall and because of, things went wrong back in the garden, our bodies, we're all going to die. And some of us are going to die infertile, and some of us are going to die after having a lot of children. Some of us will die never marrying and always being single.
Yeah. So, and that's what I respond a lot. Often you mentioned this earlier too, but this kind of libertarian movement of, basically mind your business, live and let live. If they're consenting, it's okay. But the retort that I was given was, every law, and not only we'll try to isolate this one like it's the only one that does this, but every law that we have kind of tells us what we can and can't do with the body. I can't take my body and go drive drunk, or I can't take my body and go kill someone else. So every law is really legislating a morality of some kind. It's just which one is it? And taking into account that these children, like you said, are not able to consent to these procedures or these potential lifetime, medical problems that they might have, or the women, should we allow them to consent these type of risks?
Yeah, and I think the hardcore libertarian approach, we see that with seatbelt laws. I don't want, why should the government tell me I have to drive with a seatbelt? Why do I have to ride a motorcycle with a helmet? Why, all those kind of things, my freedom, my personal rights. But on the other hand, when you show up in the emergency room at my hospital, I can't say, well, you chose to do this. We're not going to choose to take care of you because medical care is expensive and we don't have enough to go around. And there's plenty of people in the United States that don't even have medical insurance. We don't do that. We are our brother's keeper. We don't live in these little insulated worlds of just me, myself, and I.
Right.
We live in community with one another. We should be mindful of one another. And so sometimes I have to put on my helmet and not drive drunk because I'm concerned with my brother or my sister, my neighbor.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, your rights and where they infringe upon someone else's. If you look at all of our laws, you can boil it down to that, right? And nobody really lives that way practically. Basically saying, anarchy. I guess that's the one conclusion of total libertarianism. It's just that everybody could just do whatever they want, and nobody lives that way. And I don't remember who said this, but I remember listening to someone, and he said, just take his wallet and then see what his response is. He's got, they're going to want justice. They're going to want laws to protect themselves, and children deserve that as well. Okay, so surrogacy. Let's talk about surrogacy now. So I know that these are deeply tied together. But can you just speak specifically towards that industry as well? Problems that you've seen, ethical, the health risks and all of that in that industry.
Yeah. I actually just posted a story today on my X account of a 72-year-old couple who have a 16-month-old little boy born through surrogacy. The judge just ruled and gave custody to them. Um, so if you think it's not happening and it's not crazy, it's pretty off the rails. But back to my primary, what is the role of medicine? It's not to harm. My own published peer-reviewed research on surrogacy, which I did with several of my colleagues, Kelly Fell, who's also a nurse like me, um, and plenty of other studies show that a surrogate pregnancy, a gestational surrogate pregnancy, is much higher risk than than a natural pregnancy. By gestational, in case people don't know the term, gestational surrogate is just carrying somebody else's embryo. So she's just the womb. And I hate reducing a woman down to just, but she's not, it's not her egg, it's not her genetic biological child. She has agreed through contract and money, overwhelmingly, to have somebody else's embryo put in her body. And that procedure right there is an additional risk to women. So in our own research and the other research that's already been done, a couple of the studies have been done by the fertility industry themselves. So they're reporting on, against their moneyed interests. Um, and we think it's because, back to my earlier chat about organ donation, this woman's pregnant with a foreign embryo. It's not her baby. It's not her body. And so when you get a splinter, if you don't get it out, your finger swells up, might get infected because there's a foreign object in you. And your body's immediate response is an immune response to reject, to recognize that this is not natural, this is not me, this is foreign. And so we think that why we're seeing these high rates of preeclampsia, maternal gestational diabetes, are indicative of that. Her body's reacting to this, foreign. Now, coupled that with, it's not uncommon for surrogates to carry multiples because they are paid more, and the couple knows that the high chance of failure. So that also carries risk to the woman. Surrogates, even if they're carrying a singleton, one baby, overwhelmingly delivered by cesarean section. That's, a complication. We're, on one hand, we're trying to get away from cesarean section deliveries because we know that they're without risk. But in the surrogate case, it's still overwhelmingly just as a method of delivery. And in our research, we didn't set out to discover this, but we found out. We interviewed well over 100 gestational surrogates in the United States. We ended up reporting data on about 98, I think, of them. Some of them have to be excluded because for some reason they didn't meet the criteria of the study, which we didn't find out until we were in asking them the question. But we found out that they have higher rates of postpartum depression. Yeah. When you had your own children, did you have postpartum depression? When you had your surrogate babies, did you have postpartum depression? And they overwhelmingly had more postpartum depression when they didn't bring a baby home, which makes sense. Again, that's our design and how we're created to mother our own children and to nurse them, cuddle them. And we know, when pregnant, we bond with our babies during pregnancy. We don't bond with them just once they're magically born. Like, oh, I'm connected to you now. No, we're connected. And so when you break that bond, and some people say, well, if a sister wants to do it for a sister, or if we take the money out of it, like organ donation, we don't pay women to do this and take these medical risks on. It gets back to medicine should be doing no harm. They should not be asking surrogates not infertile. She's nothing wrong with her body. She is being asked to assume medical risk. She's being asked to put herself in harm's way. She's being asked to put the unborn child in harm's way. And oh, by the way, for money. So, I don't see any way, again, to do it ethically. You can't take money out because she still might die. She still might get postpartum depression. She still might have, high risk pregnancy. If you do it for your sister and friend, all those risks are still there. Because people try to navigate, well, we'll just do it this way and then it will be fine. No, I've had surrogates today with a surrogate in Boise, Idaho. She was carrying twins for a couple in Spain, and she and the twins died, and she was full term. And she had a placental abruption, where the placenta just abruptly, you know, rips away from the uterine wall. And because she was at home, but it had happened in the hospital, it could probably have saved her and the babies because they could have managed the bleeding. But she was at home and she just hemorrhaged. And of course, the twins died too. This was a
Yeah.
tragedy.
Well, so tragic. Uh, yeah, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about the bond. I don't know if we have any research surrounding this because, again, I'm sure it's not been studied really. But I can't imagine the bond created. I mean, I have 3 children of my own, and coming home without a baby, even if maybe logically, in your mind, this is not your child. So let's say, I can't remember the term you used, gestational surrogate, correct? Like not a biological child, even. I can't imagine though that bond would be any less. I mean, that baby is growing inside of you. You're feeling it, and moves, and you're nurturing it with your body, and that connection is unavoidable. And I guess that's some kind of attempt to separate that connection even more so. But also, I've seen some stories just anecdotally, but I don't know if there's any studies on the children. I mean, we're taking these children away from the only person they've ever known for 9 months immediately upon birth, and we don't even do that to dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anything to say add on that?
I do. I have a couple of things. I'll speak to the research in a moment, but first let me say this as far as the bond, because you are a mom. Yes, I'm a mom. I have 4 children. Um, it also does something to the husband's connect and to your children's. Yeah, I'm sure many of your listeners who have more than one child, the child in the home is so excited when they hear a new baby's coming. Yes, I'm going to be a brother. Oh, I hope I'm going to have a sister. I hope, and the whole family is excited. So it's not just the bond between the mother and pregnancy. And I don't even think we think about that. And I know one surrogate that I interviewed for one of my films, she talked about being out with her son in the grocery store, and his mom was visibly pregnant. And the cashier said, "Oh, are you hoping for a little boy, a little brother, a little sister?" And the little boy just said, "Oh, we're not keeping the baby. Mommy's having a baby for somebody else." And, do we want children to think that that's how families are formed? That's how babies do with their body? I mean, we're not even thinking about that bond of the whole family bond and the connection between even, grandparents and your sisters or brothers and stuff.
Yeah.
Now, the research, because it's relatively new. We didn't have the first IVF baby, Louise Brown, born in the United Kingdom until the late 1970s. And its surrogacy, it was sort of frowned upon. It probably happened in the traditional method. Traditional meaning the woman pregnant, it was using her own eggs. It was her biological child, but she acted and agreed to give the baby away. Once the child was born. So there's not a lot of data. The data we do have is children who have been surrendered or given up for adoption. There's plenty of data of that, which is why, I'm much older than you. And when I was growing up, adoption was very much a secret. They don't know. Don't tell them. It was kept as a secret, even though the kids always knew. There was just something, you can only keep it secret, for so long. And then because we knew that there was a trauma, both to the birth mother and to the child, we got away with that. Children were told, tell them early, tell them early, tell them often, tell them when you get up, when you lie down, when you walk alongside the road, tell them they're going. It's really encouraged now to have open adoption so that the child has access to find out. Or
Yeah.
even I know a family in my community that has all their children adoption, and they have 100% adoption open. And so 2 of the moms live locally and are invited regularly to the home. They're just incorporated into the family. Not saying everybody has to do that, but, we just know that there's a broken bond between their Nancy Perrier, who's spent most of her time psychologist in the space of adoption, has a book called The Primal Wound. And she talks about breaking that wound at birth, separating the mother and the child. And so we do have a lot of data that, adoptees, like, for example, have high rates of suicide
Yeah.
because of that trauma. We can't ignore that trauma. Now, we will always have orphans. We will always have a need for, um, loving homes to take children in and raise them. Children need a stable home environment. So I don't take anything that I'm saying as speaking against adoption. We've learned that broken bond causes.
Yeah.
And how can we mitigate that through telling the child early and often their story and not like wait till they're 16 and say, oh, by the way, we adopted you and drop.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, you've been on Allie's show, and I've heard her say many times, there's no better way to say it, that, that the difference is that you are helping redeem a broken situation in adoption, but in IVF and surrogacy, you are actually creating that problem. And I would say that I'm sure you probably have read studies on this and studied it yourself, but I would say that this is particularly women are more susceptible to this, that are in, lower income situations. So essentially exploitative towards those women. Can you speak towards that at all?
Yeah, if you're a woman either thinking about selling your eggs, college girls are heavily targeted for their eggs. They're not heavily targeted for surrogacy. Because usually if you're a college student, you don't pregnant, you want a quick sell your eggs, make $10,000-$15,000. Whereas if you're a stay-at-home low-income mom, surrogacy is often the the way to go because you're home taking care of your little children. And in the United States, one of the demographics that heavily targeted is our military wives. uh, my son's in the U.S. Navy, so I'm always watching the news on surrogacy and military. So, um, military wives are perfect profile because they are low income. They often have two or three small children in the home. They're underemployable or unemployable because they move. They have to move a lot. So surrogacy is sort of the way that they can help build a family. And oh, by the way, you can make $30,000, $40,000, which is a lot of money if you're a low
Yeah.
income. And as much as I love that my son serves in the military, I look at their pay rates, their pay scales, and they're not paid very well and the service that they provide. So and military wives are probably already more so primed for serve. Their husband serves in the military, serve God, serve country, serve America. Um, so it's and in the language of the marketing, whether it's targeting an egg donor or it's targeting a woman for surrogacy, it's all helping, helping, be an angel, help somebody, desperate couple. And oh, by the way, you'll make some money that could be very useful.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there any, I'm curious about this as well, another difference between adoption and something like this. Adoption, that process is rigorous as far as applying for that and having to go through background checks and visits and all these things. Does any of that exist for this industry to protect children from going into a predator's home?
Yeah, I guess I could push back a little bit on that. And there's plenty of people that have adopted children that are horrible people and that they've done news and they've, you know, I think of this one husband and wife case. It's quite old now, that were in court, I believe. And they basically tortured and abused this child until the child eventually died. So background checks are not like the get out of jail free card.
Yeah.
Yes, we do have background checks in the adoption model. We don't have them in the surrogacy model. But I'm not going to be the person that says, well, that will solve all the problems and that will make that we know the children being placed in safe and loved homes. So, it's easy to lie on a background check.
Yeah.
It's especially if you look good on paper. You have stable jobs, you have good income, you have a nice home. You could still be horrible people.
Yeah. Right.
So, I don't want anybody to think, oh, a background check, make sure that this child is absolutely overwhelmingly that is the case, but we can't say that that is always the case.
Right. But statistically speaking, I know that, and I agree with that statement for sure. I just didn't know if there were any mechanisms in place in the surrogacy industry. But I know statistically speaking that the most dangerous household for a child is when a male is present in a household that is not a biological parent. And so I'm curious, do we know any of the numbers on surrogacy? Is it usually a mom and a dad, or, do we know how frequently it's a single man? Or I think I've heard some stories of even single men from China paying for surrogates here in the United States.
Yeah, again, I always say what doesn't count doesn't get counted, and these children don't count. So we're not counting that. We're not counting, is this a surrogate who's done it 20 times? Is this a surrogate who's done it once? Is this an international arrangement? The study that you cited about the older single Asian men coming to the United States, the number one demographic of person who comes internationally um, is an older single man from China. I mean, we're talking older, like in his 40s, old, which to me is a red flag. Is this part of a child trafficking ring? Is this a
Yeah.
pornography, pedophile ring? What bad things are going on? And because of the international complexity, when you look in, I think Russia still has closed international adoptions.
Yeah.
And, people were coming in, there was the height of Russia where a lot of people were going to Russia to adopt children. And, I'm not an adoption expert, so don't quote me on any of this, but something bad was happening, for the children. So now they don't allow international adoptions. Um, we allow eggs to come from France and sperm to come from Denmark and the womb to be here in the United States and the baby to end up in France or Spain or China or wherever. And there's none of this was recorded on a birth certificate. Back to the adoption analogy, original birth certificates now, and I think all 50 states must be. You can't erase away who was the birth mother, who was the birth father, who the biological parents. But when that child grows up, if they want to go and get the access to that, it's up and destroyed. In third-party conception, egg and sperm and wombs coming from different people, the birth certificate doesn't capture any of it. It's just contact. Who's bringing that baby home gets listed, whether it's two dads, whether it's two moms, whether it's one dad, one mom. In California, we have a throuple. We have three men that are legally the parents. Or in the case that I just cited, in England with the 72-year-old people have a 16-month-old baby that they just got in custody. Clearly, they got an egg from somebody because when they you don't have eggs, clearly they have a surrogate. Did they use a sperm donor? I don't know. So
Yeah. Yeah. There's no safeguard here of following up with those children. And so, predators now hypothetically can, instead of having to go out and kidnap a child, can just point for one because it's not, how they do with a lot of things, decide euphemistic language of all of this is egg donation or sperm donation, but it's not a donation at all. There's a lot of money changing hands.
absolutely. And on one hand, while we have the adoption model and we finally have recognized the rights of the child, the human rights of a child to know and be known by their biological family, and we've changed laws to protect that right. In this context, we have no laws that protect them. So if a child grows up and they know they're a product of egg, sperm donation, and surrogacy, any combination, they have no right. They have no courthouse that they can go to and say, I'd like to find my original birth certificate.
Yeah.
Doesn't exist.
Yeah. It's very inconsistent there. But what could the average person do that you see in this space? Is it just advocacy? Yeah, how can they follow you? What new things do you have out? Just give them, an action to go forward on trying to help and be more outspoken on these issues.
Yes, I always like to tell people to play to their strengths. Because it's not a one size. I want you all to go do this. Like on voting day, we want everybody to go vote. It's very clear. I want you to do what will help you. So we make movies. We've made exploitation. We've made breeders a subclass of women. We've made big fertility. We've made anonymous Father's Day. Some people just want to sit down and watch a movie and get educated and get information about, and these are all free on YouTube, so I'm not selling anything. The Center for Bioethics and Culture Network YouTube channel has tons and tons. We have 11 documentaries, all free. Some of you like to read. Sign up for our CBC Center for Bioethics and Culture newsletter and get an email, because you like to read. Some of you want to get involved in public policy. Find out what is the law in the state where you live as far as surrogacy or egg donation. You can be better informed what's going on and legislatively, what are the laws, because the laws in the 50 states are different. Some of you like to write letters to the editor. Some of you, just interested in the podcast and say, send this podcast to your friends that might want to be interested. Have a movie night, watch exploitation and invite all the young women in your circles. I tell women, if you're sending your daughters off to college or sending them off to high school, they need to watch exploitation because they're going to be bombarded with ads to sell their eggs and help somebody. So education is your friend.
Yeah, for sure. That's what I always encourage people at the end of my show, is that this education is vitally important, and that it's not everyone has to go out and necessarily be an advocate on the ground, but just being willing to step into these somewhat difficult conversations at times with your friend. If it comes up that, hey, I was looking into IVF, then be willing to have that conversation about the risks, which is what I always say, is you have to have the truth in love. And so loving someone is sharing the truth with them. But they can also follow you on social media as well, right? You're on X and Instagram, I believe. Is it just Jennifer Lahl?
I'm on X at Jennifer Lahl. I'm on Facebook at Jennifer Lahl, but I'm not really active on Facebook. And my handle is JMom.
Okay.
When my kids were growing up, I never liked other people's children to call me Jennifer. So I always had them call me Mama Law.
Yeah.
Out of respect. So I'm Mama Law on Instagram, but I'm most active on X and then Instagram. So
okay.
But yeah, you're right. You have to be prepared. You never know who's going to be put in your path one day, and you'll be prepared for that answer.
Yeah.
Let's rethink.
Yeah.
Like I said, find a restorative reproductive medical doctor in your community.
Yes. I am curious really quick before I let you go. I've thought about trying to get involved more in legislation, and I know that that's kind of how you started, was that push and that campaign. Do you have advice for people on getting involved if they really want to be more active on the policy end of things? As it just feels a little overwhelming. How did you get started with that?
Well, I got started just because I was already writing and speaking out about this. So I got invited to give testimony by people on the ground in states. So like all 50 states have family policy organizations, nonprofits. These are conservative, overwhelmingly religious. I think in California, it's just a California Family Policy Center, Arizona Family Policy, Minnesota Family Policy Center, all 50 states, same umbrella, but each state has their own. These organizations would be involved in this kind of legislation because they tend to be involved in conservative family value, pro-life causes. So if you find out that your state is getting ready to legalize Y or Z in this area that we've been chatting about, you could reach out to them and say, how can I be? I want to be helpful to stopping this legislation or passing this legislation if it's a good bill. So I think knowing who those people are already on the ground, and there's another similar group, and I give me for those who might be listening. But there's another similar group that's in all 50 states that's going to be working. Oh, it would be the Catholic conferences. Sorry. So like the family policy centers, I think, to be wrong, are more Protestant, whereas the Catholic conference councils, Minnesota Family Council, those are going to be your Roman Catholic people on the group who are great allies and great friends. So those two organizations are firmly and they're connected with the capitals, connected with the legislators. We were brought into Minnesota several months ago, me and Callie Feld, who I work with, and we, in 2 days, we just blitzed. We spoke to senators, we spoke to members of the House. We did all kinds of roundtable conversations um, on assisted reproduction. So,
Yeah. Okay.
people are there in place. Just come alongside them. They'll probably need to have help.
I'm sure. Yeah, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that's great advice. All right, Jennifer, well, we appreciate everything that you and your writing and your ministry and your network that you both are doing in this space. And just thank you so much for being on with us today.
Oh, thank you. It was nice to be on your show.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. We'll talk soon.
Bye.
All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this episode. I just want to say again that if you have listened to this and you have walked through infertility, if you have walked through surrogacy, if you have a child that has been born this way, that they are still valuable. You are still valuable. God can redeem any situation. But again, we need to be willing to step into these conversations so that we can fix this mess that these industries really have made. I'm not talking about the individual, but these industries that really don't have your best interest at heart. And as usual, if you follow the money, you can see that that's really what they care about the most, and not protecting women and children and families. So I wanted to have this conversation to help educate you and empower you to move forward from here. Where do we go from here? And of course, as Jennifer said, she doesn't believe that either of these methods can be done in an ethical way. And so that's something for us to consider, especially as Christians, where the Bible is what we base our entire lives on, and not solely our feelings or our desires, because the children in these processes cannot consent. They cannot consent to the risk, even if we can as the adult. Our job over and over in the Bible, as we see, is to protect the vulnerable. And that's what we should do here in this case as well, even if it means that we may not get to have a child biologically. I think that we really need to consider these things moving forward. So thank you for tuning in. I pray, as always, that this empowers you, that it equips you, that you are able to have and enter into these conversations with the people that you care about with the truth and love. All right, that's all we have time for, and I'll see you next time.